Okay, I'll give you the most important piece of information right off the bat. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed how reforestation is being done in Costa Rica in big ways that will have significant and far-reaching impacts on human-forest relations. Basically, different trees are being planted and different people are planting them. Okay, now that that's out of the way, my name is Megan Brown and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. I study the relationship between reforestation, resilience, and health in Costa Rica's mountainous tropical forest regions. Because I'm an anthropologist, a lot of my research involves talking to people through participant observation and interviews, but I also supplement this with archival data, epidemiological data, geospatial data, things like that, so I can get a fuller picture of what exactly is going on. Now, in the community that serves as my field site, the forests aren't just valued for their importance for biodiversity and the economy, which is driven by ecotourism. They're also recognized as really important resources for physical, mental, and spiritual health. And the COVID-19 pandemic, which has posed significant threats to human and environmental health, has reformulated reforestation efforts here in really important ways. In order to understand the significance of these reformulations, I think it's important to establish first that reforestation here is not just about restoring landscapes, it's also about building communities and expanding communities, both human and non-human alike. So reforestation is a political process, right? It brings together a lot of different actors with competing and conflicting motivations for what they're doing, how they're doing it. But what's especially interesting in this context is that the highland community that leads a lot of the reforestation efforts does a lot of reforestation in lowland communities, which are not necessarily close by. So this means that reforestation is building ties between communities that aren't necessarily geographically proximal. This means that farmers and landowners who aren't necessarily closely connected to the more developed community center can gain access to other resources that these conservation organizations offer. And conservation organizations offer a lot that goes beyond just providing free trees and labor to put the trees in the ground. They offer advice on gardening and farming, they do water quality testing or monitoring, they do soil quality testing, they offer many different kinds of trainings and access to material resources, even including small grants. So these relationships can be really, really important and fruitful for these rural landowners. Now, this is particularly important given the significant ways that the pandemic has affected reforestation and conservation across the region. It's important, of course, to note that the pandemic has precipitated an economic crisis across the region. Tourism has plummeted, which has just devastated the regional economy and put both local families and conservation organizations in a really significant economic bind. Now, second, on top of this, during most years, foreign volunteers and students provide the bulk of labor for reforestation and tree planting campaigns. But in 2020, the travel restrictions because of the pandemic meant that these people could not come to reforest. So conservation organizations were also facing a significant shortage of labor and capacity to plant the seedlings that community members had spent the whole past year preparing. So in order to address this dual gap, community members developed an alternative economy around reforestation, where locals could receive tuition credits for their children's education or grocery vouchers in exchange for planting trees. And now this has actually since expanded into a full-scale barter-based alternative currency system. Now, in addition to this, for the first time since the late 1980s or early 1990s, non-native tree species have been included in reforestation efforts. And this change was made in direct response to emergent food insecurity, the need for households to diversify their income streams, and in anticipation of both the protracted nature of this crisis and whatever crisis might be coming next that we don't know about yet. So fruit trees were provided alongside native species, and this decision could have really significant consequences for how the goals of reforestation in the region are understood and how conservation organizations here understand their role within the community. So, in summary, the pandemic has changed reforestation. Different types of trees are being planted, and different people are planting them. By flexibly mobilizing existing community networks and reformulating conservation practices to order simultaneous solutions to community threats, this community has so far attempted to support community members in need and continue conservation efforts, something that was made possible by their experience through previous times of economic difficulty, previous natural disasters, and their experiences with the many challenges and threats of climate change, which they've been experiencing since the late 1980s at least. But despite the lessons learned and the response that's being made, the crisis continues, and community members and local organizations are struggling to earn enough to survive. And it remains apparent that the COVID-19 pandemic will have long-reaching effects. So, if you have questions about this research and you'd like to learn more, or if you want to learn more about organizations participating in reforestation in this region, check out my website, get in touch with me, because I would love to hear from you. Thanks.